January 28th, 1885. A British steamship rounded the bend of the Nile River, approaching Khartoum. On board, exhausted soldiers who'd marched across hundreds of miles of desert strained their eyes toward the city. They were coming to rescue General Charles Gordon, Britain's hero, who'd been besieged for 10 months by the Mahdi's forces. Then they saw the flags. Not British flags. Enemy flags flying over the palace. The city had fallen, and somewhere in those streets, Gordon was dead. They'd missed him by 2 days. Just 2 days. The relief force Britain had spent months assembling, the column that had fought its way up the Nile against impossible odds, had arrived 48 hours too late to save the most famous soldier in the British Empire. This is the story of Khartoum, the siege that broke a nation's heart, the death that demanded vengeance for 13 years, and the man who refused to abandon his post even when he knew rescue wouldn't come in time. Welcome to Britain's history. Today, we're diving into the siege that traumatized Victorian Britain, a 10-month ordeal where one British general held an entire city against a religious army, where political delays cost a hero his life, and where the need for revenge would simmer for over a decade until Britain finally returned to settle the score at Omdurman. But before we get to those palace steps, before we watch Gordon make his final stand against the Mahdi's warriors, we need to understand how Britain's most celebrated soldier ended up trapped in a Sudanese city with no way out. Because without knowing who Gordon was and why he stayed when everyone else fled, you can't appreciate the magnitude of what Britain lost on January 26th, 1885. And if you're enjoying this deep dive into history, make sure you're subscribed. We've got dozens more battles lined up, each one as dramatic as Khartoum. Don't miss them. Let's go back to 1884, when General Charles Gordon was already a legend. Chinese Gordon, they called him, after he'd led Chinese forces to victory against the Taiping Rebellion in the 1860s. He'd fought everywhere: the Crimea, China, Africa. He was deeply religious, personally brave to the point of recklessness, and absolutely convinced that God directed his every action. The British public adored him. He was the Victorian ideal, the Christian warrior, the selfless hero who fought for civilization against barbarism. By 1884, Gordon was 51 and had been Governor-General of Sudan years earlier, trying to suppress the slave trade. He knew the country, spoke Arabic, and was respected even by his enemies. So when Sudan erupted in rebellion against Egyptian rule, Britain effectively controlled Egypt, making Sudan Britain's problem. Gordon seemed the perfect man to handle the crisis. The rebellion was led by Muhammad Ahmad, who proclaimed himself the Mahdi, the prophesied redeemer of Islam, who would prepare the way for the Day of Judgment. The Mahdi wasn't just a military leader. He was a religious visionary who'd united Sudan's tribes under the banner of holy war. His followers believed that dying in battle guaranteed paradise. They'd already destroyed 2 Egyptian armies, killed British officers, including Colonel William Hicks, and his entire force of 10,000 men, and conquered most of Sudan. The British government, led by Prime Minister William Gladstone, didn't want a war in Sudan. Egypt was expensive enough. Gladstone's solution was simple: evacuate. Get the Egyptian garrisons out. Abandon the territory. Let the Mahdi have it. Britain didn't need Sudan. It wasn't worth British lives. In January 1884, they sent Gordon to organize the evacuation. "Just get everyone out safely," they told him. "No heroics, no last stands. Get in, get them out, get back to Cairo." Gordon accepted the assignment and sailed for Egypt. He arrived in Khartoum on February 18th, 1884, welcomed as a savior. The city erupted in celebration. Gordon Pasha had returned, and Gordon, seeing their hope, their desperation, their want trust in him, made a decision that would define the rest of his short life. He couldn't abandon these people. Think about Gordon's position for a moment. You're sent to evacuate a city. You arrive, see thousands of people who'll be slaughtered if you leave. Your orders are clear. Get out. Your conscience says, stay and defend them. What do? Obey orders or follow your moral compass? Gordon chose his conscience, and it would cost him everything. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Gordon began fortifying Khartoum instead of evacuating it. He organized the garrison, about 8,000 Egyptian and Sudanese soldiers of mixed reliability. He strengthened defenses, stockpiled supplies, armed steamboats to patrol the Nile, and he sent messages to London explaining that he couldn't evacuate. The Mahdi's forces were closing in, and abandoning 34,000 civilians to certain massacre would be unconscionable. He needed reinforcements. Gladstone was furious. Gordon had disobeyed orders. But the British public, reading Gordon's messages in newspapers, sided with Gordon completely. Here was a British hero, trapped in an African city, facing religious fanatics, asking for help. How could Britain abandon him? Queen Victoria herself began writing to Gladstone, making her displeasure clear. By March 1884, the Mahdi's forces had cut Khartoum off completely. The siege had begun. The Mahdi himself arrived with his main army and established headquarters at Omdurman, directly across the Nile from Khartoum. He could see Gordon's palace from his camp. Gordon could see the Mahdi's banners. They were separated by a river and by irreconcilable visions of Sudan's future. Gordon commanded about 8,000 soldiers defending a city of 34,000 civilians against 50,000 warriors who believed dying in battle guaranteed paradise. The odds were impossible. Everyone knew it, including Gordon. But Gordon wouldn't surrender, and he wouldn't flee. He established a routine that would sustain him through 10 months. Every morning, Gordon dressed in his white uniform. He always wore white, even in combat, making himself an obvious target to prove his faith in God's protection. He inspected fortifications, walking the ramparts often under fire, showing himself to the garrison and to the enemy. His visibility mattered. The defenders needed to see him unafraid. After inspections, Gordon would return to the palace and write. He kept detailed journals, recording everything: military dispositions, supply levels, garrison morale, his own thoughts and prayers. He read his Bible daily, and he sent messages downriver on steamboats whenever gaps in the Mahdi's blockade allowed, keeping London informed of his deteriorating situation. The Mahdi tried negotiation first. He sent messages offering Gordon safe passage if he'd convert to Islam. Gordon refused contemptuously. The Mahdi sent gifts, fine robes, proposals of alliance. Gordon sent them back. He would not negotiate with rebels. There could be no compromise between civilization and barbarism. Gordon's religious certainty matched the Mahdi's, both men absolutely convinced that God was on their side. When negotiation failed, the Mahdi settled in for siege. His strategy was simple: strangle Khartoum, cut off all supplies, wait for starvation and disease to do the work, then assault when defenders were too weak to resist. Time favored the besiegers. Every day, Khartoum grew weaker, while the Mahdi's forces grew stronger. The siege dragged through spring and summer of 1884. The Mahdi's forces attacked repeatedly, probing for weaknesses. Each assault was repelled, but casualties mounted. Food supplies dwindled. By June, rations were being cut. By July, people were eating donkeys. By August, dogs and rats. Disease spread: dysentery, typhus, cholera. The hospitals overflowed. Civilian morale crumbled as people watched their children starve. Gordon's soldiers began deserting when they could, slipping out at night to join the Mahdi. Gordon executed deserters when caught, trying to maintain discipline. But the executions only further demoralized the garrison. These were Egyptian and Sudanese troops fighting their own countrymen for a foreign government. Why die defending Khartoum? But Gordon kept the city functioning through sheer force of personality. His presence mattered more than tactics or supplies. As long as Gordon was on those walls, visible in his white uniform, the defenders believed they could hold. He became Khartoum's spirit embodied: courage, duty, faith, stubbornness, all wrapped in one middle-aged British general who refused to accept defeat. Meanwhile, in London, a political battle raged. The public demanded Gordon be rescued. Newspapers published his journal entries, creating a cult of Gordon worship. Editorial cartoons showed Gordon besieged, while Gladstone dithered. Music halls sang songs about Gordon of Khartoum. Queen Victoria herself became Gordon's advocate, writing repeatedly to Gladstone demanding that relief be sent. But Gladstone, stubborn and convinced Gordon had brought this on himself, delayed. He argued in Parliament that sending troops would cost millions, risk British lives, and achieve nothing. Sudan wasn't vital to British interests. If Gordon had evacuated as ordered, there would be no crisis. The political pressure became unbearable. Gladstone's own cabinet turned against him. The press vilified him daily. Victoria's private letters grew increasingly sharp. Finally, in August 1884, 6 full months into the siege, Gladstone authorized a relief expedition. But organizing a force to march across hundreds of miles of hostile desert required time, months. The relief column wouldn't depart Cairo until October, and by then, Khartoum was dying. General Sir Garnet Wolseley commanded the relief force, 10,000 British soldiers in a column that would travel 1,600 miles from Cairo to Khartoum. Wolseley knew they were racing against time. Every report from Khartoum described worsening conditions. Everyone knew Gordon's supplies were running out. Everyone knew that if Khartoum fell before they arrived, Gordon would die. The relief column's journey was an epic in itself. They sailed up the Nile through cataracts, places where the river rushed over rocks, requiring boats to be hauled through by hand. They fought skirmishes with Mahdist forces. They struggled against heat, disease, and a river that seemed determined to stop them. Progress was agonizingly slow, miles per day instead of tens of miles, and always the knowledge: Gordon is waiting. Khartoum is dying. Hurry. Back in Khartoum, Gordon watched his defenses crumble. By December 1884, food was almost gone. The garrison was eating anything: leather, tree bark, the city's remaining animals. Disease killed more people daily than enemy action. The effective garrison had shrunk from 8,000 to perhaps 4,000 soldiers still capable of fighting. The Mahdi's forces had brought artillery and were pounding the city daily. Gordon knew relief was coming. Messages had reached him from Wolseley's advance scouts, but he also knew it might not arrive in time. His journal entries from December and January grew darker, more fatalistic. He'd accepted that he would probably die. His faith sustained him. He believed God had put him here for a purpose, and if that purpose required his death, so be it. On December 14th, Gordon sent his last message out on a steamer. "We are besieged on all sides. We want you to come quickly. The people are becoming exhausted." The message reached British scouts. It was relayed to Wolseley. "Hurry. Gordon can't hold much longer. Days matter now." Wolseley split his force, sending an advance column under General Sir Herbert Stewart, racing across the desert on camels. Stewart commanded 1,800 men traveling light and fast through hostile territory. If they could reach Khartoum even days ahead of the main force, it might be enough to save Gordon. But the desert column fought two brutal battles in mid-January 1885. At Abu Klea on January 17th, Stewart's square was charged by 12,000 Mahdist warriors. The British held, but barely. Stewart himself was wounded. 2 days later, at Abu Kru, another battle. Stewart was mortally wounded, a bullet through the groin. He died days later. Command passed to others, but precious days had been lost. The desert column reached the Nile opposite Khartoum on January 24th. They could see the city. They prepared boats to cross. But something felt wrong. The city seemed too quiet. On January 26, 1885, before dawn, the Mahdi's forces launched their final assault. They knew British relief was close, perhaps hours away. This was their last chance. The attack came along the Nile riverbank, where seasonal water levels had dropped, exposing mudflats the warriors could cross. The garrison, weakened by starvation and disease, hadn't maintained defenses there. Thousands of warriors rushed across the mud and over the low walls exhausted defenders couldn't hold. The walls were breached. Warriors poured into the city. The massacre began. Gordon's death remains debated. Some accounts say he died on the palace steps, dressed in his white uniform, facing attackers with dignity, unarmed. Other accounts say he was killed in his room or trying to fight his way to a boat. Victorian artists painted him on the steps, defiant to the end, a Christian martyr facing Muslim fanatics with noble courage. The image became iconic. What's certain is that Gordon died that morning. His head was cut off and presented to the Mahdi as proof of victory. The Mahdi reportedly didn't want Gordon killed. He'd wanted him captured alive and converted. But in the chaos, warriors found Gordon and killed him. The Mahdi accepted it as God's will. The massacre in Khartoum was brutal, Thousands of civilians were killed or enslaved. Garrison soldiers who didn't flee were slaughtered. The city was sacked, everything of value taken, buildings burned. Everything Gordon had defended for 10 months was destroyed in hours. 2 days later, January 28th, British steamboats from Wolseley's advance force arrived. Officers scanned the city with telescopes and saw enemy flags flying over the palace. They landed briefly, confirmed that Khartoum had fallen and Gordon was dead, and withdrew. There was nothing to rescue. The relief force had failed by 48 hours. When news reached London on February 5th, the nation erupted in grief and rage. Queen Victoria sent Gladstone a telegram, en clair, so everyone could read it, blaming him personally. These news from Khartoum are frightful, and to think that all this might have been prevented and many precious lives saved by earlier action is too frightful. The press savaged Gladstone. Cartoons showed him with Gordon's blood on his hands. The acronym GOM, Grand Old Man, Gladstone's nickname, was reinterpreted as Gordon's only murderer. Gladstone's government fell within months. The public never forgave him. He delayed, dithered, and let a British hero die while politicians argued. Statues of Gordon went up across Britain. Memorial services packed churches. Gordon's name became synonymous with selfless courage and sacrifice. He was everything Victorians wanted their heroes to be: brave, Christian, self-sacrificing, dying for duty in a distant land. The casualties tell the story. Gordon, dead. His garrison, massacred. Civilians, slaughtered or enslaved. The relief force that had fought across hundreds of miles, 48 hours too late. 2 days separated rescue from tragedy. But the consequences of those 2 days echoed for 13 years. Britain didn't forget Gordon's head displayed on a spear. Britain didn't forget the palace steps where he died alone. Britain didn't forget the steamboats arriving to see enemy flags flying over Khartoum. The Mahdi himself died 6 months later. His successor, the Khalifa Abdullah, ruled Sudan with an iron fist. Britain watched with seething resentment. For 13 years, Sudan remained closed, hostile. British public opinion never forgot. Politicians who suggested leaving Sudan alone were shouted down. Every year on the anniversary of Gordon's death, newspapers ran commemorative articles. Remember Gordon became a rallying cry. The debt had to be paid. In 1896, Britain began planning reconquest. By 1898, General Herbert Kitchener, who'd been part of the failed 1885 relief expedition and had sworn to avenge Gordon, led a massive force up the Nile. He built a railway across the desert, methodically destroyed Mahdist resistance. At Omdurman on September 2nd, 1898, 13 years and 7 months after Gordon's death, Kitchener annihilated the Khalifa's army. 11,000 Mahdist warriors died. British casualties were 48. After Omdurman, Kitchener sailed to Khartoum. Near the ruins of Gordon's palace, he held a memorial service. Officers and soldiers who'd grown up hearing about Gordon gathered where he'd died. The Union Jack was raised. Gordon's favorite hymn, "Abide with Me," was sung by men whose voices broke with emotion. Kitchener himself wept openly. Gordon was avenged. The debt was paid in blood. Gordon's last journal entry, written days before the final assault, captured everything. Now mark this. If the expeditionary force does not come in 10 days, the town may fall, and I have done my best for the honor of our country. Goodbye. He'd done his best. Britain had sent help. It arrived 2 days too late, and that 48-hour gap defined everything: the grief, the rage, and the 13-year quest for revenge that ended at Omdurman. If this is the kind of history that fascinates you, the tragedies that shaped an empire, the moments when timing meant everything, the deaths that demanded vengeance, then you know what to do. This channel exists because these stories deserve to be told. Thank you for watching Britain's history. The stories that mattered, told the way they deserved.